Hi, everyone. My name is Norma Nieto, and I'm the Director of Transformation here at CEI. I'll be facilitating our webinar today focused on developing a DevOps mindset. Thank you so much for joining us today. We know it's the day before a holiday, so we're excited that you could join us to kick it off. Before we get started, I'd like to cover a few housekeeping items. First, this session is being recorded, and the download link to the recording will be shared with you afterwards. Second, we will have live Q&A at the end with our presenters. To ask a question, please use the question feature on your GoToWebinar control panel, usually found at the right side of your screen. You can use the question feature during the presentation as well if questions arise while you're watching. And for any questions we can't get to in our live session today, we'll be sure to follow up with after the session. I will mention that our presenters today do have their webcams on. If you would like to turn on your webcam and get a look at them or wait until the Q&A, you certainly can do that. And you can move your webcam screens around. It's also found on the control panel under webcam. So you can say show all webcams, and you'll be able to see the presenters, and then you can always click out the box to close that down. So without further ado, let's introduce our presenters. So for our main presenter today is Richard Goforth. He's a senior architect here at CEI. He's a flexible software architect with over 13 years of experience in .NET technologies and SQL Server. He also has experience with mobile development, C#, and various scripting languages. He has been responsible for full lifecycle software development in numerous industries. Rich is focused on taking DevOps from an imaginary future to practical changes now, improving processes and getting the consequent results. You can find some of his courses on LinkedIn Learning, and obviously you can tell from his picture that he's just a really cool guy. Next up, we have Chris Wooten, who's our DevOps Lead Solutions Sales Executive here at CEI. He's based in our Washington, D.C. metro area office. He's a DevOps Lead Senior Solutions Account Executive and has 30 years experience working with customers on solving IT and business problems. He's ITIL version 4 Foundation certified, Six Sigma Green Belt. He's a Microsoft PSSP, and he's DevOps Sales certified. And last up, we have Mike Snell, our VP of Solutions Delivery, who's joining us today. He has 25 years of experience leading teams to create software that clients love, and has led our solutions group for 18 years. He's a recognized industry thought leader and has led his team in the successful delivery of projects across nearly every industry using every technology you can think of. He's also a published author and has written 8 books to date, including the Visual Studio Unleashed series and various Microsoft training kits. He's mostly going to be lurking in the background today, but he is probably going to chime in and will also be available for our Q&A portion. So quickly, this is what we're going to cover today. We are going to cover the what and why of DevOps, developing a DevOps mindset, the habits and culture that go along with that. We'll tell you about the Azure DevOps tools. And then Chris will take us through a case study, talk a little bit about how we can help you, and tell you a little bit about CEI, and then we'll jump to the Q&A portion. Okay, and now with that, I will turn it over to Richard to kick us off. Richard, you're on mute. Can't hear you. Not sure why he's on mute.
Okay, no, I'm good now. We're good. Cool. All right. Thanks, Norma. So I'll start with a question. How do I get me some of that DevOps that is so popular right now? How can I just hire some DevOps, or can I just tell my people to start doing DevOps? Do I have to form a DevOps team? You know, so the question is what is DevOps? Go ahead. All right. So So first I'll start with, what isn't DevOps? DevOps doesn't just mean some CI/CD. It doesn't mean automation. It doesn't mean, I've got a site reliability engineering team. And it's definitely not Azure DevOps. Azure DevOps is part of DevOps, but DevOps, when we talk about that, it means the whole thing. It means the union of people, processes, and products to enable continuous delivery of value to our end users. I love this definition. It's very encompassing, right? It brings the whole thing together. Go ahead. So we want to think about how, how does DevOps increase that value? How do we get increased business value out of DevOps? We can break this down into 3 different specific goals, right? One of them is shortening cycle times, tightening that timeline between knowing what to do and getting it done. This, excuse me, sorry. You can do this through advanced release management. You can do it through automation tools, and you can do it through analysis to find out where those bottlenecks actually exist in your process. You want to be able to optimize your resources and eliminate some waste. Find new ways to automate what's manual, eliminate the time where nothing's happening. You can increase the quality and availability of your solutions. Find out what isn't working. Don't just guess or have a hunch. Trace and track and get metrics that prove what needs to be done, what's failing and what's succeeding, instead of just guessing. These items, these portions of DevOps are more important now than they've ever really been. And so the next question we want to answer here is why DevOps, right? So we can, why do we want to institute this? The DevOps Research and Assessment Org was formed several years ago, and from this 2018 report, and these numbers are a little different now, and they've done some new reports since then, but these numbers are really compelling, right? Deploying faster is great. Like I can get 46 times faster if I use a DevOps mindset, if I focus on DevOps as part of my organization. 2,500 times faster lead time means getting your ideas to market faster. This can be a huge difference in market share when you're the first one out there. On top of that, right, we're saying, okay, I can get my stuff out faster, but is it any better? Is it any safer? And the answer is yes, right? A 7 times lower change failure rate, 2,600 times faster mean time to recover, right? Mean time to recover is a industry metric that says how fast do I recover when something does go down, right? If there's a service that's down this morning and it takes 2 hours to fix, and then it was down tomorrow and it takes 4 hours to fix, I've got a mean time to recover of 3 hours, right? This is so much faster when you start adopting these DevOps principles. Going from no DevOps to a little DevOps to a lot of DevOps principles in your company is going to significantly increase your ability to address the market well. All right, go ahead. So the thing is, I can't just turn on DevOps. I can't just get those things together and start doing those things all at once. It's not a switch I can turn on. It's not a team I can hire. It's really focusing on a path toward DevOps maturity, right? I can take one little step at a time. Sometimes that's a big step, and I, start using continuous integration. And sometimes it's a little step that says, hey, we want to start doing a retrospective and start thinking about how we're doing things and not just doing them. You can, you want to focus on those goals that you have, and then you can go back and refocus on those goals and find out what's changed, right? Every so often you say, come back in and say, okay, these were the goals that we had initially. How do we go in and improve those goals? How do we go in and change those as we go? We achieved step 1. Is step 2 the same step 2 we thought it was when we started? A good example of this maturity model that we use, right? So we say we start ad hoc, right? I'm a developer on a machine. I'm going to right click and hit deploy, and I'm going to deploy some web app to production, right? That's really scary to me, but it happens all over the place, right? It's just saying, okay, I'm just going to get something out there and it's going to work and that's going to be enough. And sometimes like that's enough in the initial phases, but okay, what if something happens to that guy? Okay, well now I need to make this repeatable. Let's take that right click publish and maybe make it a script. Okay, now it's repeatable, but it's not really well defined. I don't know where we're keeping that script. I don't know how to deal with it. So now I can take that script and make it a development pipeline, right? Now that's a defined tracked piece of how we get to deployment. Then I can go in and start to manage my pipelines or my sets of pipelines. I can find out how I'm doing things, and I can change those with some focus, right? And then finally, you get to this optimized stage where you're thinking ahead and being able to say, okay, this is how we deploy things. This is what's working. We can change this. We can focus on these continual gradual improvements that are going to bring us to this optimized DevOps state where you're going to start to get some of those benefits that we saw in the earlier slide. We can increase that business value by focusing on specific principles that enable it. Let's get into some of the specific mindsets, habits, and changes that organizations can make to level up. So this is all about practical ways that you can develop these DevOps mindsets and habits, as we're calling them, right? So we'll start with, how do I create a value stream? What does it mean to go from an idea to something that's useful, right? I want to be able to say, okay, if I can automate testing, I can tighten up that value stream. If I continuously integrate and deploy, I can tighten up that value stream. If I have a 4-month deployment cycle, no matter when an item gets in there, there's no way that it's going to be, figured out and deployed faster than 4 months. And that's a long time in a lot of markets right now, right? So focusing on the idea that there is a flow of customer value, there's a value stream in your work, and how are you going to go in and take that value stream and make it more effective? How can you measure it and improve it? The next is organizational structure, right? Without thinking about your organizational structure, you can end up with these really deep hierarchical items where a lot of things are someone else's problem, where okay, well, that's the database team's fault, and the database team is like, well, the developers didn't protect against this kind of data, and you get this big back and forth fighting, and things just don't get done like they need to get done. So the question you want to go in and ask is, how does our organization help or hinder our development progress, right? Teams are consistently more effective when they have some control over their own destiny. They have control over the way they work, but individual teams are not usually enough to run a whole company. So how do we align those teams that are working on something cool or something interesting or something good to some sort of enterprise goals? And this is a delicate balance. You can do this through a lot of specific things, like saying, okay, I need cross-functional teams. I don't want that database team and that front-end team and the web API team and the ops team, right? If I bring all those people together into one team, they can actually get the flow of customer value from one end to the other complete, right? I still need to align that team with enterprise level goals, but that team itself can be much more effective if they have some power over their own destiny. This leads us into being able to continuously learn, right? So how do I improve that process all the time, right? You have a process now, whatever that process is. Sometimes that process is pretty weak, and sometimes it's just, well, this is the way we've always done it. But you want to go in and constantly refine how you're doing things. Look at the process, analyze the process, and make it better. You can make that process better by actually gathering real evidence. Like I mentioned just a little bit ago, right? How do I actually go in and test and find out that there's users are using this feature or not using this feature? How do I get feedback from my users? How do I, experiment and find out that I'm doing the right thing? So focusing the development process, saying this is part of the development process. I do actually need to monitor this application. I need to see how it's failing and succeeding and get real information, real numbers. This is going to be able to go in and go back into refining your backlog and go back into how do I get a flow of customer value out the door. I'll go ahead. So the next part of these mindsets here is, okay, there's technical debt is a real thing, right? Technical debt is that amount of work over time that's keeping an application from being as pliable as it used to be, right? It used to be relatively easy to add, a new screen to this thing, but now that when I add this screen, I change this data and that messes with this screen, and there's a lot of interactions, coupling happens over time. So I want to be able to take that out, right? And the way to take that out, the biggest way to take that out is actually just assign time to that. I need to go in and assign time to something that says, this is worthwhile. It's worthwhile for me to manage the technical debt of my application. I can do that with things like, code reviews and documentation. I can do that by figuring out how to manage my application's dependencies in a broader way, right? I can, maybe go from passing around DLLs to actually using something like NuGet packages. Things like that are going to, things like focusing on your architecture and focusing on the ability to continuously improve your application itself, rather than actually just adding features, is going to continuously make it easier to add features to improve the application, improve the way it works. The next kind of mindset and habit I want to talk about is production first, right? If you're not focused on getting something into production, it's not going to happen, right? So, well, it can happen, but if I spend 2 years writing some application, I've never actually tested it on production hardware with production workloads, I don't have anything really, right? I don't have any customer value. It goes all the way back to that first one, that flow of customer value. Unless I have something like that MVP, that application that got to production, right? So focusing on from the very beginning, how is this going to look in production? What kind of hardware is it going to run on? What kind of hardware is it going to need? This is really valuable in the development process, and it's one of the big mindsets and habits, right? Like, focus on production, because production is what delivers value to the user. Getting some code written, having a really pretty front end doesn't deliver any value to the user. Having a really great back end doesn't provide any value to the user. You want to actually be able to find that whole flow and get that whole flow out the door, right? That leads us into the last one I have here, is infrastructure integration. Infrastructure needs to be a first-class citizen in the development process. When it's an afterthought, when it's, okay, we're going to deploy that on some servers and I'm going to have somebody else figure out how much RAM and how much CPU and all these things, like and how it's going to grow or shrink, how it's going to scale, that should be a first-class citizen in your application's development, right? How do I scale the application? Can I use infrastructure as code, right? These kinds of things are things you can retrofit on an application, but if you think about it first, it's going to be so much easier to build smart applications where the infrastructure is infrastructure is upfront. Infrastructure actually matters as you build the application. Go ahead. So we talked about DevOps being that union of people, processes, and products. So when I go in and I think about people, process, and products, excuse me, one second. When I go in and think about that kind of people, process, and products idea, that's process, right? All those things we've talked about so far are really focused on how you do things, not what you do them with or who's doing them so much. But it's not just about that. It's really about the people in a lot of ways. People are who write the process. People are who obey or don't obey the process. If you don't have buy-in from your users, you don't have a lot, right? Like I need the whole team to be bought in to the DevOps vision, right? This is really important when you go to implement something like this where you're working. You have to go in and say, how do I implement this? If people don't buy in, you don't have much. So the next kind of thing I want to roll into here is what DevOps culture is, right? And one of the great authors in this space is Gene Kim. He helped with the DevOps assessment reports with Dora. He's written a book called the DevOps Handbook. He's written the Phoenix Project and the Unicorn Project. I recommend all of these books. They're really fantastic for helping you find new ways to think about DevOps. In this case, in the Unicorn Project, he presents 5 ideals of DevOps. Excuse me. So the first ideal is locality and simplicity. How hard is it to make changes? How many people does it require to make those changes? And how much does one little change kind of affect the world around it? Intentionally going in and looking at your applications and the work of each person and saying, hey, am I focusing on locality and simplicity? How do I make sure that it's easy to make changes and you make the changes close to the things that they affect? This usually means breaking down and decoupling code, but it can also really you also really want to focus on reducing the number of people required to actually get something done. The next of these 5 ideals is focus, flow, and joy. Minimizing dependencies and uninterrupted work, being able to find that flow state, right? The sense of accomplishment after a day, not interrupted by meetings, where I can just sit down and put on some headphones and get something done is fantastic, right? My sense of self-worth, my sense of happiness in where I work is really important to producing good software, right? If I don't like the place I work, if I don't like the boss, I'm going to have a hard time. If I don't like the way I have to work on a really old laptop or something like that, I'm going to have a much harder time doing the right thing well. So finding the improvements environmentally that will help you kind of reduce those dependencies and reduce those interruptions and distractions, allowing people to actually find, focus, flow, and joy is really important, a really important ideal of DevOps, right? That really is part of that is really improvement of daily work. I should be able to be focused as an engineer on being able to constantly improve my daily tasks. If I don't get the chance to improve how things are done, then I'm going to be doing the same thing over and over again. I'm going to be falling into the same errors. I can find a way to automate it. That can really improve things, but maybe it's actual changes to the code base, like we talked about with paying down technical debt, right? If it's really hard to make good database changes, I want to be able to make that better, because every time I make changes to my database, I want that to not be miserable, right? I don't want to suffer. So looking for that daily process improvement, have people look for, how can I improve what I'm doing from a day-to-day perspective? The next one is psychological safety. This one is really important. It's really easy to find somebody to point fingers at, to start laying blame all over the place when things start to go wrong. And it's not valuable, right? Like, you're either going to make somebody suffer, or you're going to make somebody quit, and you're not going to actually improve the process. If somebody goes in and accidentally, dismantles a prod database, it's not because he wasn't careful enough. It's because he was tired, he was overworked, he had the prod and the test database up at the same time because he's doing that work at the same time. Whatever the reason is, it's about the process, it's not about finding the right person to blame, so the right person to throw under the bus. And this is a real big problem at a lot of organizations. It's like, okay, well, how it's their fault, it's their fault. right? This isn't actually going to improve the process of delivering software. You can do things like the blameless postmortem, analyzing the process when something bad happens, not the person. The last one here is customer focus, right? Software isn't about getting people just to use some software. It's about the business at the end of the day. I didn't use PowerPoint for the joy of using PowerPoint. I don't get a lot of thrill out of using PowerPoint. I do enjoy being able to present information in webinars effectively, right? I want the audience member to be able to focus, not be asleep or not, be able to pay attention as I keep rambling on and on, right? Remembering the customer is about keeping the end goal in mind, having everyone responsible for that end goal. Every player in the value stream should have some concern or responsibility for that end product. If I, as a developer, don't have concern for the end product, I'm gonna wait for QA to catch that. I'm gonna just, I know that's been a problem for a while, but we're just gonna work around it because it's easier to work around than to actually fix. Those kind of mindsets are gonna leave you with broken software that have lots of bugs that aren't really driving organizational changes. These cultural items, right, these 5 ideals are about changing the way that engineering teams work and build a culture of responsibility and trust. And that's what's going to result in great software. All right, so we talked about our process, we've talked about our people, so let's talk about a product, right? That's the next step. So I've only got one product in mind right now, right? It's Azure DevOps it's a tool that enables DevOps in many ways. That's why they call it Azure DevOps, not because it is DevOps, but because it enables DevOps. It's really a set of tools that you can use one or more of, but when you use it all together, the integration you get, the value you get out of that integration is pretty significant. I'm not really, I don't want to just, sell DevOps, but presentations moving around. I'm not just here to sell DevOps to you, right? It's not the only way to focus on these mindsets and habits of DevOps. Just adding Azure DevOps to kind of a poor work environment isn't going to fix anything. It's not going to improve your process just to tell everybody to start using Azure DevOps. Microsoft does DevOps and Azure DevOps at an enterprise scale. They have over 110,000 users at Microsoft of Azure DevOps. It's not just their tool for everybody else, it's the tool they're actually using to build everything. Microsoft engineering is massive, and it's massively open source, and they use Azure DevOps to enable that. Go ahead. So I'm just going to hit kind of a couple of the big features of Azure DevOps, right? Of the sections that we saw there at the beginning. So one of those is, the first of those is Azure Boards, right? This is, I like the summary line they gave for this slide, right? Combine Kanban boards and drag and drop sprint planning with comprehensive traceability and reporting. Boards is wildly flexible, and it's powerful, and it includes a lot of insights and analytics on top of that. And that's going to give you that ability to go in and measure your process, find out where you're succeeding, where you're failing, where bottlenecks are happening. Being able to just work for a little while and open up the cycle time chart and say, hey, how long does it take for us to go from a new item to an item in production? And being able to just see that and constantly measure it so that you can improve it, find out how to get work out the door faster. Go ahead. So Azure Pipelines, and they use the little rocket often as the icon for this, right? It's a launch pad for your code. It makes it easy to automate your builds and spend less time with the specifics. You can actually spend more time kind of getting work done. It's wildly extensible. I know I like the word wildly, but there you go. The marketplace provides the marketplace that you can use with it, right? Provides all sorts of functionality, everything from code security to code analysis, test analysis, right? Being able to deploy quickly to containers, being able to spin up new deployments that use, you can even combine things like manual steps and manual approvals with automated steps like scripted deployments, right? You can deploy a containerized ASP.NET Core web app out to Azure. You can deploy an old LAMP stack application on AWS. You can deploy a mobile app to the Apple Store, all with Azure Pipelines, in a way that's going to integrate with your boards, in a way that's going to integrate with traceability and auditability. That's really best in class. Azure Pipelines is also really deeply, almost quite, Azure Pipelines is really deeply integrated with GitHub. You can use Azure repos or GitHub, but you can bring those things together as your source code storage, right? You can use either one very effectively. All right, go ahead. All right, so the next thing, the next kind of big feature set that I want to talk about, and it's really the last one I'm going to talk about, is with specificity, is test plans, right? So test plans allow you to bring automated and manual testing together. It gives you a really great, ability to report and know exactly where you are in that testing cycle. You can combine it with things. There's a browser extension called Test and Feedback that they've created that integrates right in with test plans. You can use it so that a tester can actually come in and use that as their test script, right? You can build the tests, manual tests in Azure DevOps. You can combine your manual tests with your automated tests and be able to run through scripts and things like that. You can also use it for a business user who's using the app and they see a bug, and then they click on this, and then they can report the bug directly into Azure DevOps with screenshots and system information, even screen recordings, and make it really easy for a developer to find and fix that bug. I really have had a lot of success helping customers, get on and use testing, and then make testing part of their workflow so that their application is tested faster and better, and exactly where the application is in the testing process. All right, go ahead. So bring it all together, right? We've got the people, the processes, and the products. All these mindsets and habits are going back to that definition of DevOps, bringing these things together to create that flow of customer value that improves the organization, improves the happiness of the people working at the organization. It's really exciting. So go in, find out what you can do. And I'm going to turn it over to Chris so he can talk more about some specific kind of things that we've looked at, and some specific case study that we've done to help somebody bring into Azure DevOps.
That's great. Thank you, Richard. I really appreciate it. Great job as usual. Richard and I have been working together for years and have traveled throughout the US evangelizing this message and taking it to clients and so forth. So anyways, let's talk about some real work that we did. Norma, you can go to the next slide. So this is probably the largest DevOps engagement we've ever done, probably with the largest amount of transformation in it. So the backstory is, it's a global law firm. It's one of the top 5 law firms in the world. Actually, they started out 100 years ago, and in the early 2000s, they were a Baltimore-based regional firm, and they started a series of acquisitions globally. And after the acquisition of about 18 different law firms, their footprint was literally around the world. I think the numbers are up here. They're in 40 countries with supporting offices in each of them, about 2,500 billing attorneys, and then the additional about 3,000 staff behind that, for a total of about 5,500 people with about $5 billion a year in revenue. As a result of all these acquisitions, they had picked up a lot of IT departments and kind of mashed them together into a team of about 130 people scattered throughout the US, different data centers and the whole bit. Because they were busy doing acquisitions, they were really having a difficult time having effective IT. Real important takeaway from this. The issue is this, that due to old methods, tools, and skilling, It had paralyzed new solution development and created a stagnant 5-year backlog with absolutely no major projects delivered within that time frame. While they were doing maintenance stuff and enhancements and upgrades, but they weren't delivering anything. Why is that important? Because as every industry, the legal profession is changed drastically, and innovation has not only become a differentiator to them, but it's almost become a mandate, things they have to do. So they hired a new CTO, which is actually their chief transition officer. He came in, spent a couple months, and then presented a plan which was approved. And he says, I want to do a digital transformation of this law firm, and I'm going to drive it using DevOps. And the way we're going to do it is bring in a partner, CEI, to help assess where we are, build a roadmap forward, and teach us DevOps. And he says, and how we're going to do that, and he says, is I want them to come in and show us how to do it. So they picked the highest priority project on the backlog, really a significant business impact on it. And I'll tell you what it was, that they're on a cash accrual business. They do their billing at the beginning of the year based on estimates. This is what we're coming on retainer-based billing, get into Q4, and then they do true-ups on all their billing. That brings in about $1.5 billion in revenue, required 15 people in accounting to basically work nonstop through the holidays, trying to pull that together. And it was always wrong. They always had to go back and do it the next year. So quoting the CTO, he said, we decided not to go gently into the night in this adoption, that we were going to set the world on fire. So based on that, we came in and we did two things. We did an assessment, and then we dropped the team in place to execute this project and co-did it with their people. They mirrored every single role person that we had, and we taught them how to do it. So Norma, could you go to the next slide, please? So what did we assess? What did that look like? So if you look across the top of it, from left to right, you can ask a question with this. So when I'm developing a new solution or I need one, how do I identify and design it? How do I develop and test it? How do I release and deploy it? How do I monitor and optimize it once it's deployed? And underneath that, you've got a series of processes, ceremonies, and habits that match all that. And then on the axis on the left-hand side, you've got at the bottom, ad hoc, scaling all the way up to manage and optimize. So what we found on the initial assessment was, as no surprise, it was all pretty ad hoc. And I'm going to pause right here because this is really, really important. These are good people that we were working with, their IT team. They were working really, really hard, nights, weekends, really trying to support the organization. I mean, the first time I walked back in one of their big IT areas, I saw pizza boxes and Mountain Dew, right? That's the environment in there. It was run by heroics. And it was a lot of good people trying to do the right things who were constrained. So Norma, you can go to the next slide. So we executed this project, and about 7 months later, these were the results. We did a reassessment. The blue is where we started. The green were the things that have been achieved. And then the things that are in orange are things that were in process at that point. So we had moved them up to a place of reliability before we handed the keys over to them. So what was the result of all that? Norma, next slide, please. So we implemented the project. Probably the most important thing is the business loved it. The business paid for it, and they thought, this is fantastic. This is really going to take us into the future. So it was about people and process. So these are the things that we institutionalized, things that they'd never done before: daily stand-up meetings, leadership calls thrice weekly, weekly project status meetings. They hadn't been doing weekly project status meetings at all. Sprint retrospectives, leadership dashboard reserves. Using Azure DevOps, we were provide real-time information on work and process instead of reporting that was 2 or 3 or months behind. Things around dev test, burn down reporting, backlog growth, critical item. You can read the rest of this. But what we really left there was we institutionalized a 2-week release cadence within this organization. So now we're getting to CI/CD. It was very successful. They made a submission to the Financial Times in London, which runs an annual competition for law firms around the world in multiple categories from pro bono work to things around IP, intellectual property, blah, blah, blah. And one was on technology. So they submitted for the work that had been done in DevOps. Sadly, I can't say we got first place, but with this client, we took second place, which amazingly, we did all that in 7 months. Areas they're going into now are all kinds of things around blockchain and really modernizing the organization. So Norma, next slide. All right, let's talk about DevOps assessments and what does that mean to you. So I'm going to reuse a slide from Richard, and this is really important because this is really the mantra we believe in DevOps, that, you know, it's the three things. I'm sure everyone has seen these in other slide decks that are going around the community, but, you know, it's about shortened cycle times. It's about being faster to market, faster to respond to users, faster with technology. Optimize resources. I'm going to come back to that in a second. And it's all for naught without improving quality and availability. But going back to resources, we talked about technology, we talk about process, but we talk about people. And as Richard mentioned, this is really, really important. I'll not only speak to what I've been doing at CEI for 10 years around this, but my very long career. I have had the privilege of working with some incredibly highly skilled and motivated people, not only in the companies I've worked for, but in client sites. I have found that mostly they are constrained from doing the things where their passions lies. Look, developers like to come to work and they like to do one thing. They like to build stuff, right? Testers come to work every morning and what they want to do is break everything, right? Gartner did a report years ago and they found that project managers spend 80% of their time doing what? Chasing status reports. Well, with the right tools and automation, all those things just happen. So you're allowing people who have these passions and skills to spend that time doing them. That's what you hired them for. So sometimes people look at DevOps and they say, well, look at all the process you do. No, it's to really pull the constraints away so you can do the things you really like to do. All right, so Norma, next slide. So how do we engage at CEI? Go down to the bottom of the slide. This is what we believe is the path forward for organizations who have interest in not only doing, not necessarily big things like that client I just talked about, but they want to adopt a better way to do things around deployments or managing source code. I mean, there's a million things they can do. Say, hey, we just need to initially solve these problems. They all seem to fit this formula. It's about education, planning, adoption, and realization. Education, you know what you know, and you don't know what you don't know. So we educate clients on what is available and what you can aspire to. And that actually began today. We started doing some of that. We take that down to deeper dives with organizations, running workshops with them, day in the life demos, things like that. Now, all the words above that, they're kind of fluid. They can move around up there. But typically, you'll get involved in planning sessions, actual assessments where we build those very specific roadmaps on those things, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. One thing that I like to call out about CEI is we're a very pragmatic organization. We're not the organization to come in and spend 5 days from 8 till 5. Now, of course, we do it using Teams. Just giving you lots of PowerPoint. We can certainly do some of that. Actually, we get into the user community. We will do some of that. There's so much good stuff out there that's something that's almost a self-learning. And if you've been paid attention this week, 2 days ago, Microsoft announced their whole skilling effort with their LinkedIn group on that they're making massive investments and have committed in the next year to train 25 million people in retooling them. And part of that's around DevOps. That training, certification, it's free. You can do all that stuff. But what we do in our real sweet spot is once we build up that framework or that path forward, as that example I just used with the case study, is we get into your organization, we take things that are relevant to your enterprise and help you teach you that with the things that are really, really important to you. So next slide, please. Norma?
Yep, before I continue, I just want to say that we are pretty much at the end of our time. So if you can stay on and hang on with us if we have Q&A and just for the wrap up, we appreciate it. You will get a link to the recording as well as the presentation itself. So we do thank you for attending, and those that have to drop off, we understand. Otherwise, we'll keep going. Thank you.
Thanks, Norma. And we do want to get to Q&A, so I'll go really quick on the final 3 slides on it. So what we're finding since we all went home because of COVID-19, organizations are, it's important. I mean, innovation is almost done a 180. Just last year, innovation was how do I go to market and have more offerings for my customers? How do I become a market differentiator? How do I disrupt it? That's still relevant, but organizations have turned internally now and they're innovating internally. How can we do things better, not only from an IT perspective, but organizationally and using the DevOps to do that? So we're seeing a lot of interest and a lot of engagements around this of saying, hey, come in, do a quick 3-day assessment on us, work with us, identify opportunities, a very quick pass through to do a quick assessment, help us map that towards our aspirations, do some workshops so we can get into it and then develop that roadmap forward, and then we can talk about what that's going to look like for execution and realization with the organization. These things there's a lot of them happening right now, and it's a great way to solve those initial problems whilst upping your maturity level. Next slide. All right, and one more slide. All right, so closing out real quickly. So when it's an interesting organization, 15 years ago, our very first partnership was with Microsoft, and we became an ALM partner. And it's really become a real bedrock of not only our relationships and our partners, but the culture of the organization. Since we've gotten into this, we've done over 250 of these engagements. We have over 600 employees. Not all of them do this, obviously. We do things just like our customers. We build software, we build solutions for our clients. What technologies? I think the list of what we don't get involved in is probably way shorter than the ones that we do. So we've done over 1,000 project engagements with our clients using everything that you saw today. And then one more slide. So we're ready to help you. There's 3 things I think that you can take away that we can do. Like I talked about earlier, we can do day in the life demos. These are quick assessments, team workshops, things like that. These are things that we do, and this time, a lot of this stuff, these are not billable things as a consulting organization. We can do a lunchtime workshop with your team. We'll do a pre-call to figure out what the premise is of the things we'll be talking about. We'll bring Richard in, perhaps a couple other architects with our organization who specialize in API management, whatever that thing is, data, what have you, we'll put that together. And then we can get in towards the execution around proof of concepts, partner-funded engagements. Our partners lean into us, especially Microsoft, say, hey, we need help with this. There are funding buckets available to help finance some of these things. And of course, this is where some of the real heavy assessments sit in. And I've talked a lot about pilot projects. We're a big believer in I'll teach you how to drive your car, not mine, and strategic planning and rollout, all the things around that. So you can reach out to your local seller, your CEI seller, to talk more about it. My contact information is up there if you choose to reach out to me, and we'd love to continue the conversation and help. Thanks, Norma.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Chris. So we do, if there are any questions out there, please use your control panel to ask the question. And while we're waiting for some questions, I'm going to ask if Mike Snell, who's on, has any closing comments or any additional thoughts that he wants to share.
Thanks, Norma. No, I thought that was fantastic. The guys really did cover everything that we wanted to make sure that we got across. I will say that as they mentioned, we've been doing this for a long time. You know, back when it was called Application Lifecycle Management, or even sort of the TFS products. We use other products besides the Microsoft, but I know this conversation was focused on Azure DevOps. But anybody's environment is probably going to touch other things for various other products for various needs, whether it's requirements management or automation or deployments and what have you. We've got experience in all of those tools as well. We run into that stuff all the time. And I'm sure it was mentioned before, but I think it's critical to mention that we've probably done 250 to 300 implementations of DevOps type engagements with customers. So we really do have deep experience here. Any questions so far in the question list?
We don't have any questions.
Okay,
so
great.
Must be self-explanatory. Good job, guys.
I did such a great job.
Okay, yeah. So thank you all for joining us today. Before we wrap up, I want to remind everyone of our continuing summer series. So 2 weeks from today, we have unlocking customer data with the Azure Data Platform. And then we're going to do innovation and adoption with human-centered design, which is going to be really, really interesting. Then we're going to switch to our Cloud Center of Excellence in Azure and wrap up our series with RPA, which is something we know a lot of people want to learn more about. So we appreciate everyone's time today, and we hope you found the content valuable. As follow-up, we will send you an email with a link to the recording that you can use to review or share with others in your organization who would be interested. The email will also include registration links to the rest of the series of webinars if you're not already registered. So thank you again to all our presenters, Richard, Chris, and Mike, and hope that you're ready to get started on a DevOps path. And please reach out to Chris or your local CEI account executive. Before I go, Chris did have some book recommendations, so when we send the presentation out, you'll get these, but since we're over time, that's pretty much all we have time for today. So thank you again.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.